If they allow people, we'll be there.
Ron, are we streaming live already or have we
Yes,
not
we are.
started
We
yet?
just started.
Oh, maybe we should inform folks about that for a meeting so that they know that their conversation is live.
Yes, we generally start 2 minutes before the hour, or 2 minutes before the meeting starts.
Right, thanks.
That was Jill's polite way of telling us to shut up.
Yes, I know. She's so good at that.
No, I just wanted to make you aware. That's all. It's your choice. Good morning.
We also have the ability to truncate the video recording at later.
So technically, the meeting hasn't started yet, but perhaps Phil can start with the housekeeping matters, Dr. Burke.
Okay.
Thanks, Wayne. Dr. Burke, I'll just start with some housekeeping remarks. It's just about 9 o'clock. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Mobile Source Committee meeting. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together. 2 formats for participation. We have the Zoom web app as well as teleconference. But before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions. These are very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. So please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. And during the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for board members and the AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. And after each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. So for those of you on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click the raise hand button. This will signal the host that you would like to provide public comment and you'll be added to the list. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, you could please tap the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen. If you're calling in using the phone line, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal you'd like to make a public comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn and the host will unmute your line automatically. And please note you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Just please adhere to the speaker time limit. Please treat others with courtesy and civility. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remain in effect for video participation as well. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures are prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. And any violation of these rules can result in your mic being muted, your video shut off, or you being dropped from the phone or Zoom meeting lines. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Burke.
All right, I'll call to order the Mobile Source Committee meeting for September 18th, 2020. And you really don't have to monitor your testimony time, because the computer cuts you off at the end of 3 minutes. So people should know that it's not us, it's the computer. And we will begin with agenda 1, item 1. Sarah Reese will give us a presentation on the Coachella Valley item.
Great. Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Reese. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning here at the district. And today I'm going to give an overview of where we are with our implementation plan for the 1997 8-hour ozone standard for the Coachella Valley. Next slide, please. So first, to give you an overview of where we are with the different ozone standards, there are multiple ozone standards. EPA revises them over time, and so hence we have these multiple standards. The first ozone standard, the 1-hour standard from 1979, good news there is that the Coachella Valley attains that standard and has for several years. Today, we're talking about the plan for the 1997 8-hour standard that has an attainment date of June of 2024. There are also later standards that we'll eventually have to meet. So we have the 2008 8-hour standard and the 2015 8-hour standard. Those have attainment dates of 2027 and 2033 respectively. Next slide, please. To give a little context about the the nature of air quality in the Coachella Valley. So Coachella Valley has the perhaps misfortune of being adjacent to the South Coast Air Basin. And as such, pollutants, ozone, and then also the precursors to ozone, so NOx and VOCs, they transport from the South Coast Air Basin to the Coachella Valley. And so most of the air pollution that we experience in Coachella is really due to these pollutants transporting over. Next slide, please. We've had some questions about the boundary of the Coachella Valley. So California, and in fact, all the US is divided geographically into different air basins for purposes of managing air resources in the state. And that's because air quality has a regional nature to it. Makes more sense to manage air quality when it's within a region of similar weather conditions, as well as geographic boundaries, and then also political lines when you're considering issues like authority. California air basins are used by EPA for purposes of designating attainment or non-attainment. And note here that the Coachella Valley region is part of the Salton Sea air basins. That also includes the Mojave Desert region. Next slide, please. In terms of figuring out when you attain a standard, we look at this metric called a design value, and that's a statistical measure of air quality. The way that's calculated, and this is set by EPA rule, is you look at the 99th percentile value of each year and then average that. And for our purposes, the frequency of monitoring that we use, the 99th percentile for ozone is the 4th highest daily max standard. So we take the 4th highest daily max standard for that 8-hour period in each year. We average those across the 3 years, and that gives us the design value by which we're judged as to whether we meet the standard or not. Next slide, please.
Dara, are you there?
I am. Can we have the next slide? Thank you.
Yep.
Great. So just a little bit about the trends in Coachella Valley. And again, we have a good news story here. Design values have been going down. So here we have on the red line is the 1-hour ozone standard. And the blue line below it is the 8-hour ozone standard. And you can see this has been trending down nicely over the last almost 30 years now. We do meet the 1-hour standard, and you can see that by the dashed red line is where the 1-hour standard is. The dashed blue line is where the 8-hour standard is. And you could see that we were definitely on the route to meet the 8-hour standard. But if we had continued the trend as of 2015, 2016, we definitely would have met the standard. But you can see we trended a little bit up in 2018 and then we're back down again in 2019. And so that caused a little bit of a problem for us. Next slide, please.
Dr. Burke,
Yes,
this is Supervisor Perez. Good morning, everyone. Can I raise a question on that slide?
yes.
And I guess I'm seeing it here as well. But so I see that the dip there in the 8-hour ozone standard up to 2016, and then 2017 we went up a bit. Then 2018 went back up a bit. What were the reasons there? Do we understand what happened there in those couple of years? 2017, 18.
It's our understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had some, very some hot weather conditions. We had some periods of stagnant air during that time. So these were all conditions that were very extra conducive to forming ozone. I think we also experienced similar increases in the South Coast Air Basin as well. And as I mentioned before, we do have transport from South Coast Air Basin into Coachella. So Coachella area is very heavily influenced by what happens in the South Coast Air Basin as well.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was something specific that might have happened, because I'm seeing the trend from 2003, for example, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, continuously going down, right? So I'm just wondering if there was some sort of event. I assume that the LA Air Basin, the air was still coming down to the Coachella Valley during that time as well. I assume that we still had hot weather regardless, because it's always hot back home. So I'm just wondering if there was something that might have occurred, some sort of event, some sort of issue that might have, maybe illegal burning that might have happened all of a sudden that was maybe more extreme. I'm just wondering.
It was really, oh, go ahead, Phil.
If I could just interject, Supervisor Perez, as Sarah said, it is always warm in Coachella Valley in the summer. We know that, but it was unusually stagnant and warm in those years, 2017, 2018. And these high ozone levels, as Sarah said, they were experienced in Coachella Valley. They were experienced in the basin. They were experienced all over the Western United States. There was an uptick in ozone across the Western US because of those summertime conditions that were unusual in those 2 years. And then 2019, we see some improvement, and 2020, we were seeing some improvement, but lately with the fires and some very hot weather, it's probably not going to look good for 2020.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Burke.
Great. We can have the next slide. So this is another view of air quality in Coachella. This, instead of looking at levels, we're looking at the numbers of days that we exceeded the standard in Coachella. And you can again see that the trend, it's good news in that the trend has been going down. So the number of days we've exceeded the 1 hour standard, we actually haven't exceeded the 1 hour ozone standard since 2012. The number of days we've been exceeding the 8 hour standard has also been going down as well. Again, we see that blip in 2017 and 2018, but then it goes down again. Next slide, please. So in terms of the current status for the Coachella Valley, it is currently, before it used to be classified as a severe non-attainment area, which had an attainment date of 2019. So for ozone non-attainment, there's multiple classifications. Coachella was classified as severe, which is pretty high in terms of classification. But we did see that the monitoring data, even though we had this downward trend for 2016 and 2018, it showed that we did not attain the standard by that June 15th, 2019 deadline. So the Clean Air Act, when that happens, it allows you to ask for a bump up to the next level of non-attainment. And so back in July of 2019, the Coachella Valley was granted this voluntary reclassification from severe to extreme by EPA. This gives us a new attainment date of June 15th, 2024. So we have additional time to the standard. As part of that, we have to submit a revised state implementation plan, which is due in February of 2021, which is the plan I'm talking about now. And then there's also stricter permitting requirements for stationary sources. Effectively, a stationary source, the level of emissions that they have that would classify them as a major stationary source, that's dropped down to 10 ton per year. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at local emission trends in Coachella Valley. And you can see this is a comparison on the orange bar of 2018 emissions versus what we project in 2023, this sort of kind of yellowish bar. And you can see overall, again, emissions are going down. There's some areas where they're staying a little same or going up a bit. So we're looking at the NOx emissions and the VOC emissions. Again, these are the precursors, the substances that form ozone in the atmosphere. And with the exception of area sources, everything appears to be going down. So it's good news there. Next slide, please. And then we would compare these emissions to those emissions coming off the South Coast Air Basin. It gives you some context of just how much is coming from South Coast versus what is generated in the Coachella Valley. Again, we are looking at VOC emissions and NOx emissions, and this is for our 2018 emission inventory. You can see it's kind of massive how much is coming in the South Coast Air Basin versus what we see in Coachella. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you, it's a little bit of a scenario of what would look like if we played around a little with the emissions. So we want, a lot of questions we get is that, we say that the emissions are coming from the South Coast Air Basin, but, what are we doing to reduce emissions in Coachella Valley? And this shows that it's, we get a lot more bang for our buck in terms of reducing emissions from Coachella Valley. So the first bar, the blue bar, that shows business as usual in 2018. So, current rules that we have on the books, current emissions, and that gives us a design value of 89.3, which is above the standard. The orange bar is a model of what it looks like if we removed the emissions from all large facilities in the Coachella Valley. And you can see that ozone doesn't really go down by very much at all. It's very, very slight. And then we look at the gray bar, and that's our model if we remove all man-made sources of emissions in the Coachella Valley. And again, it goes down, but not really by a lot, and it's still over the standard. And then finally, we model where we should remove all of the man-made sources in the South Coast Air Basin. And at that point, we see a more significant drop in ozone, and it goes down to 71.3. Now, I will caution and caveat that this is, pretty rough modeling. It's, a simulation just to show the relative impact of removing different sources of emissions. But, we would have to do more sophisticated modeling eventually to see what that would actually look like. But it just gives you a sense of the impact of emission reductions in South Coast on Coachella versus emission reduction in the valley itself. Next slide, please. In terms of where we look at in our base and future design values, currently in 2018, we are above the standard in Palm Springs and Indio. But as we look at our preliminary modeling for a future design year, based on the plans and the reductions we have on the books, Palm Springs will be below the standard, and also Indio below the standard in 2023. Based on a preliminary model, we also believe that we'll be below the standard in 2022, so we'll be meeting it well in advance of our required 2024 deadline. Next slide, please. A pathway for attainment in Coachella, we believe by implementing the current plan we have in place, so those rules and regulations that are already on the books will provide us the emission reductions that we need. And then recently adopted rules and regulations that we've adopted since the 2016 AQMP, they give us more of a cushion, so continued insurance that we'll be able to meet the deadline in 2023. And then, again, based on our preliminary modeling, we believe we'll be able to meet the deadline even earlier back in 2022, but we still are targeting 2023 to give us a little bit of a buffer, given some uncertainties in weather conditions for our emission inventory and also in modeling conditions. Next slide, please. With the plan we have to submit to EPA, there's a couple of key requirements. So first, we have to give an updated emission inventory and then show the path, that attainment demonstration by how we expect we're going to achieve the standard. We also have to provide a control strategy analysis. So this shows the continued implementation of the 2016 Air Quality Management Plan will get us there. We also have to provide an analysis of reasonably available control technology and reasonable available control measures. So it's a comparison of how our rules stack up compared to others that are out there and which ones are more stringent. We also have to demonstrate reasonably further progress. So that's a percentage of emission reductions per year that we have to show. And then, as I mentioned before, the threshold for classifying a stationary source as major, that drops from 25 to 10 tons per year on NOx and VOC for stationary sources. And so we're making amendments to our Title V and new source review programs to reflect that. And then we also have to have some contingency measures in place in the event that we fail to meet a milestone or EPA has a finding of a failure to attain. These contingency provisions would then be triggered. Next slide, please. For our public process, we did discuss this plan at our August 26th AB 617 East Coachella Valley Steering Committee meeting. And then we also had an AQMP advisory group meeting on September 3rd. Our draft plan is out and available for public comment, and we released that back in September 11th, so last Friday. Today, we're speaking to you guys at the Mobile Source Committee meeting. We do have a public consultation meeting scheduled on September 25th. Public comments are due on October 13th, so that gives just over a month for public comment, and we plan on releasing our final draft plan on November 3rd. The bullets on the slide mentions sure that we're planning on going back to Mobile Source Committee November 20th. I think because it's so close to this discussion, unless there's major changes to the plan between now and then, I don't think we will be coming back to committee, but instead we'll be going to board on December 4th for board consideration, and then shortly thereafter submitting to CARB and EPA following the board's approval. And with that, I believe that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'd like to raise my hand here if I can figure this out. Dr. Burke, can I raise a couple questions?
Dr. Burke, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I muted myself.
No problem, Dr. Berg.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess thank you for the presentation first and foremost. I had an opportunity to visit once, I guess via Zoom, not too long ago, and was there with the community and the assembly members. And I think another time I went at the Coachella Library, was there for a bit in the beginning, just to kind of get a feel for the community and their thoughts on 617 and the efforts of AQMD. And then we also had that organizing meeting, I think it was maybe a year ago or so in Palm Desert. And there was quite a bit of questions that came up back then when we were talking about reclassifying, and there was quite a bit of concerns moving from severe to extreme. I guess my question now is, what are we hearing now from the community? What are you all hearing as far as moving from severe to extreme? I know early on there was that concern. Are folks still as concerned now that you've been able to provide all this data, all this information? Just want to get an update if you don't mind.
Maybe I'll jump in here, Supervisor Perez. So there's kind of two aspects to this. So one aspect was what we did last year when we went through this bump up, and we analyzed how many facilities are going to be affected by lowering the major source threshold to 25 from 25 to 10. And there were lots of questions that came up last year when we did this request for a bump up. And it turned out that there was maybe 2 facilities that may be caught between this 10 and 25 tons per year threshold. We have not, they're aware of this, and there's some things they can do if they wanted to stay below 10, but we have not really heard any concerns necessarily from those 2 facilities. Obviously, any new facilities that come in that are over 10 now instead of 25 would be subject to major source permitting requirements in Title V. The other aspect you mentioned is, are we hearing from the community? So obviously this Coachella plan is not just about Eastern Coachella, it's about the entire Coachella Valley.
Right.
We have heard, when we had our AB 617 meeting last month and discussed this at the meeting, we did hear some concerns from community members about, pollution in Eastern Coachella Valley. And we explained that, as we saw in the presentation, that the ozone levels in Coachella Valley are really primarily due to transport and our emission issues upwind in the basin. And that's how you have to solve the ozone issue in Coachella Valley. For AB 617, the focus is on community exposure and reducing emissions in the community and that local exposure. And in Eastern Coachella Valley, we have open burning, we have dust issues, we have a major waste to energy plant, we have the Salton Sea. So AB 617 is really designed to deal with those types of pollutants and those types of issues, and we're working in that direction. But we did get some concerns about these lingering ozone levels that still do not meet standards. But as you saw, we're making great progress. We had every reason to believe in 2016 that we would meet our original 2019 attainment date if you saw the trend. But we just hit some unfortunate weather across the Western US, and every state, every local area agency is dealing with the same question that we are. Was that an anomaly? Is that the new normal because of climate change? And do we have to start planning for the warmer weather as we go forward?
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate that. So two tracks, right? It's like 2 parallel tracks. On one front, obviously doing our best back home to the degree that we can with the illegal burning, for example, or trying to figure out ways as to how we can suppress the dust. And then obviously the other track of dealing with transportation and diesels coming in maybe from other areas or driving down to 10, or quite frankly, just the emissions that are coming from the LA air basin. So I get that. I'm wondering though, how many, I think I saw that we have a monitor in Palm Springs, correct? And then we have another one in Indio,
That's
Correct.
correct.
right? Is there another way down south in the Salton Sea area? The reason why I ask is because from Palm Springs to Indio, it's about maybe a 35, 40-minute drive, maybe a 35, 40-minute drive. It's another 35, 40-minute drive from Indio all the way down to the North Shore Salton Sea area. And I'm just wondering, are we able to monitor as effectively in that region if we had that monitor there? I guess I'm asking, do we actually have a monitor there in that region as well?
So we do have an air monitoring station in the city of Mecca. I
Okay.
don't believe we are measuring ozone there. We're mostly focused on PM 10, PM 2.5 in that area. And the reason is that's where we have a lot of dust, the Salton Sea, and other issues. And if you saw in the slides, you see that Palm Springs actually has higher ozone than Indio. And the expectation would also be that probably Mecca would have lower ozone than even Indio, because what's happening is the transported pollutants are being concentrated in the Banning Pass. They first hit Palm Springs, and then as it moves east, they get diluted more. So it kind of concentrates the ozone through the pass. Palm Springs is the first to experience it. And as it goes east, it has more time to dissipate. So Indio's usually is almost always less ozone than Palm Springs. And we would expect Mecca to be even less. So Palm Springs is what we call our design value site, our highest site in the area. But in Mecca, we put that site in several years ago because of the dust issues. And again, there'll be more monitoring out in that region through AB 617.
Okay, thank you for that. And just one last question, just if by any chance, hopefully this is not the case, what happens if we don't meet the attainment overall? What would happen to any type of funding streams or in the region of the Coachella Valley?
Well, I can maybe weigh in on that one, Supervisor. So if we fail to meet the standards, US EPA could move and say that we failed to attain. There are certain measures then that have to be implemented. And during that time for the failure, there's a sanctions clock that begins running. Part of what we're trying to do is make sure that we address all of those particular issues. But as we've said before, we're describing processes the way that they normally have happened. This administration hasn't done that. And so there are certain things that we think that they could begin almost immediately. So for instance, later this month, I believe you'll be hearing on contingency measures for 445 for ozone consideration. That's to make sure that the EPA can't find that we haven't provided the information in time. So there are other measures too that we are considering. Part of the consideration that we're looking at is modifications to the Clean Air Act, trying to look at the US government being more responsible for those sources which it's directly responsible for. And as you've said, transportation is a big impact and the US government has primary authority over those mobile sources. So there are a number of measures that we're looking at. And in the past, we've talked about some of these. We've talked about potential strategies to deal with it. But for now, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we don't hit the sanctions clock that would start the kind of penalties which would actually withhold DOT transportation funding. Now, there are certain provisions that are related to that. There's safety provisions that have to be considered. And all of these would potentially impact the entire region. And I think that we've estimated that loss of potential DOT dollars would be anywhere from $4 to $6 billion a year. And these are real sanctions. We take them seriously.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you for the presentation and for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Any other committee members have any questions for Susan? Sarah? Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good. Phil, you have anything that you'd like to speak to on these written reports?
Nothing additional to the reports, Dr. Burke.
Okay, do we, oh, I should have asked if there was any public comment on Sarah's report.
There was not, sir.
Okay. Then, is there any other business before the committee? Is there any public comment at any location?
I don't see any hands, sir.
Okay. Then that concludes the Mobile Source Committee meeting for today. And our next meeting will be October 16th at 9 a.m.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Everybody have a nice weekend.
You too,
Thank you.
Dr. Burke.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.